UFC doesn't just run the sport, it is the sport.
He will never fight in the UFC ever again. It's done.
This basically means that whatever the UFC says is law in MMA, and while Dana White privilege can seem like a blessing in disguise, it disappears the moment you stop playing by the UFC's rules.
I'm gonna be real, man. The other side, those are your losers. We're coming over here to this side's victory table.
You could have fought me January 23rd, and I would have done the same thing to you.
Hey, man, you fucking said no, man. I'm gonna be real. You got this shit handed to you. You got Dana White privilege.
Tony. Thanks, Dana.
As the sole ruling force in the sport, the organization can dictate who gets promoted and who doesn't, and just as quickly, they can decide who gets buried.
Dana White controls the narrative of what the public perceives.
Because when you get on the bad side of the UFC, your career can change overnight. Everyone talks about how the UFC began in 1993 when Royce Gracie shocked the world with his jiu-jitsu, but that wasn't really the UFC as we know it. Back then, the organization was still run by the Gracie family. The Ultimate Fighting Championship survived a couple of years under its founders and even gained some mainstream notoriety before it nearly collapsed.
I started managing Chuck and Tito. And through that, I got into a huge battle with the old owner of the UFC named Bob Meyerowitz, who's from New York. And, basically we're battling over Tito's contract, and he flips out at me one day and says, you know what? There is no more money. This is it. I don't even know if I have enough money to put on one more event. And I was like, oh shit. I called Lorenzo and I said, you know what? The UFC's in trouble. I'll bet we could buy it, and I think we should.
That was the moment Dana White convinced the Fertitta brothers to purchase the promotion, putting the former boxer-sized coach in charge. From there, the real transformation began, even though the first few years were far from easy.
I mean, it was so bad that at one point Lorenzo called me and said, Dana, I can't keep doing this, man. I'm literally blowing all my family's money. And obviously that night I'm thinking, we're done. It's a wrap. This is over. And he calls me the next day, and literally this is what he said to me. Let's keep going.
So Dana, backed by a billionaire company in Zuffa, quickly began swallowing up competition. Pride, Strikeforce, WEC, eventually every MMA organization that began to stand out and sometimes even outshine the UFC was bought out of business. The result was obvious. A single company controlled not only the biggest marketplace for fighters, but also was on the verge of owning every alternative out there. And when you've got the field to yourself, you get to call the shots.
If the promoter controls rank and title, you have total control over the athlete's career. Now all you have to do is remove other titles, which is what they did. They bought WFA, they bought the Assets of Affliction, IFL went away, they bought Strikeforce, they bought Pride. And they're not buying these promotions, to continue doing business under them. They're buying them to acquire the fighters and remove the title. After the Strikeforce purchase in 2011, they had virtually every fighter 1 through 15 in every weight class.
It got so bad that in 2014, a group of former and even current UFC fighters filed an antitrust lawsuit against the organization. The lawsuit accused the UFC of running a monopoly, an organization so massive that it not only limited fighters' leverage in negotiations, but was also so dominant that it restricted their ability to compete elsewhere. At the heart of the case was the claim that the UFC's dominance wasn't just about being the best promoter, but about deliberately eliminating competition to ensure fighters had nowhere else to go.
The courts find that the plaintiffs have established that defendant willfully engaged in anti-competitive conduct to maintain or increase their market power. This was mainly accomplished in 3 ways. First, through the enforcement of exclusionary contracts, which kept fighters locked up in the anti-competitive manner. Second, through extra contractual methods to make fighters contracts effectively perpetual, and third, through acquisition of shutting down rival competition.
And this lawsuit would turn out to be one of the biggest legal battles in the history of combat sports. After more than a decade, the fighters reached a major settlement in 2025, marking one of the few times ever that the UFC had to take a step back.
They settled for $335 million. This is a massive, massive victory for the UFC. And it's such a blow.
For the fighters or for the UFC?
For the UFC, no. Awful for the fighters. Nothing changes.
But even with that settlement, the UFC still controls the game. Isn't it weird that the UFC seems to be getting worse at promoting its fighters, while at the same time racking in record revenue? After McGregor, the biggest celebrity the sport has ever produced, the organization's efforts to create new stars have fallen flat. Sure, names like Adesanya, Poatan, and Khabib were needle movers, but at the same time, it feels like there's little underlying effort to truly elevate them beyond the cage. That could actually be by design.
Rich Franklin, Chuck Liddell, Randy Couture, that era, those athletes were bigger. Matt Hughes, those guys were bigger than the sport of mixed martial arts. They were bigger than the UFC because they were stars, right? You look at Conor, you look at Ronda, they're bigger than the sport. But now, they don't really get behind any athletes to promote those athletes because we don't want the athlete to be bigger than the product itself. We want the product to be as big as possible. That way, if we have, Power Slap that's being sponsored by the UFC or UFC BJJ, whatever it may be, the brand is still strong, not the athletes, because athletes come and go.
MMA fans no longer get to watch highly anticipated press conferences nor one-on-one interviews with the fighters that could generate iconic moments.
Hey pussy, are you still there?
I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm here.
Instead, the norm has now become Dana White announcing pay-per-view cards on Instagram stories, and if we're lucky, maybe also getting a Nino drama collab.
What's up, guys? I'm going live in 10 minutes on all social media platforms. Got some info for you. See you soon.
But what can explain this apparent refusal to invest in their own fighters? Maybe McGregor's rise may have something to do with it. The Irishman starred in the 7 most sold pay-per-views in UFC history, and he was also in the 2nd most sold event in combat sports in his bout against Mayweather. For a time there, it stopped being the UFC's show to run. McGregor had leverage, and he knew it. He began asking for a stake in the company itself, not just bigger purses or bonuses, but actual ownership.
You want me to stick around? You want me to keep doing what I'm doing? Let's talk, but I want the ownership now. I want the equal share. I want what I deserve, what I've earned.
Creating another McGregor could mean creating another fighter capable of capturing attention everywhere he went. And that goes against the UFC's centralized power. So they stopped trying to create larger-than-life narratives. And yeah, the product may be worse now, but what are you going to do? Watch the PFL?
So a monopoly doesn't technically mean they're 100% of the business. It means that they have enough control of the business that they do dictate fight terms, fight pay, things like that. If UFC is only paying 20 grand for a title shot, why would Bellator pay 500,000? They'll pay 25.
This power discrepancy basically allows the organization to dictate whichever narrative is the better fit for the moment. If a fighter walks the walk, they may get on the UFC's good graces and get some of that Dana White privilege. But if a fighter begins voicing their concerns, or even worse, threatening to become a free agent in search of better pay, the UFC may flip the script. Suddenly, you're hard to work with, or you're afraid to fight, and then they decide you're not worth promoting. Because behind every narrative, there's a fighter who got crushed by it, and the consequences for stepping out of line are swift and brutal. Just ask the fighters who learned this the hard way. Tom Aspinall was never the best promoted fighter on the roster. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, really. The UFC spent years trying to gain the British crowd. Despite being a gatekeeper for most of his career, Michael Bisping was one of the most promoted fighters on the roster back in the day. Now they have Tom, an English world champion in the most marketable division in the UFC, and they still show no interest in promoting the lad. His own father hinted that Tom might try his hand at boxing because the pay was better.
I think if you get into that top percentage of the sport, the UFC do not pay anywhere near as much as the boxing does.
And right after Aspinall's last fight ended in a no contest after he got eye-poked by Cyril Gane, Dana White took the opportunity to imply that the champion may have used that opportunity to quit.
He had Tom bloodied up, and Tom didn't want to continue in the fight.
Whether that is true or not is irrelevant. The bottom line is, why would a promoter bury his own fighter, and even worse, one of the few fighters to naturally stand out in a shallow and uninteresting roster? Aspinall is the face of modern British MMA, and even he isn't immune to Dana's politics.
He got poked in the eye multiple times, one of them knuckle deep, and his promoter is saying Tom didn't want to continue. Not Tom was fouled with an illegal strike, multiple illegal strikes. Let me ask you a question. If that happened in some alternate universe to AJ, to Anthony Joshua, what do you think Eddie Hearn is saying? Eddie Hearn's probably still at the hospital with him. That's the difference.
And Tom is far from the only one. Muhammad Mokaev looked like he was going to be the next champion at 125 pounds. But Mokaev may have overplayed his hand with the UFC, and the result couldn't have been worse for his career. Mokaev went 7-0 in the UFC, and today, he could already be at the top of the weight class. However, after fighting out of his contract, it was the organization that chose not to offer him a new contract. White pointed to disagreements over his fighting style, and also stirring up problems backstage with other fighters.
He's just a guy that did everything wrong and pissed these guys off. I wasn't involved in any of the stuff that happened with him, but you know, the matchmakers and Hunter were, and they weren't happy with him. They weren't happy with the way he acted. They weren't happy with a lot of things he did and said, and you know, yeah, I guess you can look back now and regret it, but you did it. You did it, and you put yourself in this position.
And what about Henry Cejudo, who retired as a double champ, expecting the UFC to come begging with a better offer? He ended up sitting out 3 years on the sidelines while the division moved past him.
In my opinion, you can't take 3 years off in a combat sport. It's never done well for anybody.
And if you're curious about how Cejudo fumbled his double champ status when trying to challenge the UFC, check out the full breakdown on our channel. Ultimately, the fact of the matter is that the days of the UFC needing fighters to draw pay-per-view buys are long gone. Pay-per-view already took a hit when the organization finalized the ESPN deal in 2019. At the time, the change to ESPN Plus flipped the traditional pay-per-view model. The new deal introduced a fixed amount of revenue for the UFC, about what they'd earn if every event hit 500,000 buys. And while this made pay-per-view buys fail, it guaranteed a bump in revenue for the organization. This made the fighting promotion far less dependent on the next McGregors and John Jones to stay afloat. In that scenario, the UFC no longer has to chase stars, and with a new deal closed worth even more money, we could be witnessing a shift away from meritocracy in the sport and into the entertainment era. One of Dana White's biggest talking points to promote his brand is that, in the UFC, you always have the best fighters fighting each other.
There's no secrets here. There's no, there's no politics. The best fight the best here. You know what I mean? One of the big problems with boxing has been you couldn't get the best to fight the best. You know, Riddick Bowe threw his belt in the garbage so that he didn't have to defend it against Lennox Lewis. And so many other things that have happened in the past where we didn't get to see the great fights we wanted to, or we saw them way too late. Here, the best always fight the best. And there's no secret to that here. This didn't just pop up yesterday. This has been the way we run this business for 20 years.
But as the organization kept becoming more influential and mainstream, promises started to bend. The new Paramount deal was undeniably a big success for the UFC. The promotion closed a partnership with the entertainment company worth $7.7 billion over 7 years. That means that the organization now has a guaranteed payout of $1.1 billion per year.
The last ESPN deal was worth $1.5 billion, and that was 7 years. I mean, we are talking about almost that per year now. That is a huge sum of money. That is well beyond what the optimistic expectations were.
And this bump doesn't only represent more guaranteed cash, it also makes the UFC even less dependent on star value. Be it a card headline McGregor or Alexandre Pantoja, at the end of the year, the payout is the same. Stars aren't born in a vacuum, and back in the day, there was a real need for collaboration between fighters and the promotion. Give McGregor a world tour of press conferences, hype Ronda up as the best boxer in the world, heck, have Anthony Pettis on the cover of a Wheaties box while you're at it. They needed to promote the sport to promote the brand, but at the same time, the marketing wouldn't usually cross the line from sport to entertainment, but now, they can just push for whoever they want.
Maybe people don't want to admit that this is more of a business than it is a sport.
And as painful as it is to admit it, Jake Paul may have a point. The UFC just announced the first few cards of 2026 under the new deal. To kick off the Paramount era, the organization came up with several exciting fights. In the span of 1 week, we'll get to see 2 numbered UFC cards. The first will feature women's MMA legend Amanda Nunes versus Kayla Harrison, and the card will be headlined by Justin Gaethje versus Paddy Pimblett for the interim lightweight belt. 1 week later, Volkanovski will defend his featherweight title against Diego Lopez. Yes, the guy Volk just beat. Sure, as entertainment value, those fights will likely be great. Gaethje is probably incapable of delivering a boring fight, and a rematch between Volk and Lopez will likely be fun as well. But neither Lopez nor Paddy Pimblett are seen as the rightful title challengers. Far from it, actually. Diego skipped over 2 undefeated contenders, Lerone Murphy and Movsar Evloev, the former even holding a win against Lopez himself. Meanwhile, Paddy, whose bed win was against a near 40-year-old Chandler, is skipping over Arman Sarukian, who won 10 of his last 12 fights in the UFC.
What happens to Arman? Arman's gonna have to fight who? What is going on? What does Arman Sarukian have to do to get a shot at the belt now? I know he had the fight back in January. He got hurt. Sue the guy. He sat patiently. He went out there. He steamrolled right through Dan Hooker. He did exactly what he had to do. He did what Khamzat and Islam did not do. He finished his opponent on the ground in dominant, impressive fashion. And now what is he? Now he's just floating in the wind. And he's not even next, apparently.
Sure, he pulled out of the title shot at the last minute, but since then, he has made weight and been the backup fighter for Oliveira versus Topuria, and beat Dan Hooker in a bout the UFC itself marketed as a fight to determine the #1 contender.
Dana, earlier this week, you scheduled Arman Sarukian to fight Dan Hooker in November.
Yeah.
And will the winner of that fight become the #1 contender in the lightweight division?
Will the number of that? Yeah.
And when push comes to shove, Dana White let Paddy leapfrog the entire division.
He had an opportunity, and you guys know how that played out, and he's gonna have to work his way back. I don't give a shit what the number says.
But here's the thing, guys like Sarukian and Evloev really have no leverage against the UFC machine, and the fans, while they can certainly vent their frustrations, don't really hold any power either. But what happens when a fighter defies Dana White and actually wins? Francis Ngannou was at the top of the world when he decided to leave the UFC. Unhappy with what the promotion was offering him, the Cameroonian chose to bet on himself.
There was a lot of frustration over the years. I think since my fight against Stipe, my first fight against Stipe, my relation with the UFC never been the same.
He had to let go of what every fighter can only dream of, the belt, the platform, everything. And for him, the move couldn't have gone better. Outside of the UFC's reach, Francis was able to make tens of millions while losing at boxing. And he also landed a deal so ridiculously beneficial to him with the PFL that it may have financially ruined the organization. It was arguably Dana White's biggest miss in his career.
Dana said no new deal for Francis. He still have 3 fights on his contract. And to be honest, I was even happy because I wanted to knock that deal out. By that time, I understood a little bit about the market. I just wanted to fight out my contract and renegotiate as free, you know.
Not only did Ngannou show that he could succeed elsewhere, but he also laid out the blueprint. If the conditions are right, a fighter can have demand outside of the UFC. As expected, Francis Ngannou became the target of many accusations.
Francis Ngannou is a bad guy. He's not a good guy. He plays the whole, I don't understand the language, and he tries to come off like he's a nice guy, you know what I mean? And people go, oh, it's the language barrier probably. No, there's no language barrier with this guy. He's a bad guy. And I told my guys, you know, I wanted to cut him early. And 2 of my matchmaker guys were like, oh, no, you don't understand. I said, guys, let me tell you a story. When somebody shows you who they are, believe them. Believe them. And this guy has shown. So he's going in to fight Stipe Miocic in Boston. And he knows he's going to kill Stipe, right? So after the press conference, we're walking down this hallway and he comes over to me and he grabs me and he says, let me tell you what's going to happen. His English is great, okay? No language barrier whatsoever. When this fight's over, you're going to book me a private plane to Paris. And I said, I laughed. So yeah, he goes, I'm not joking. You're going to book me a private plane to Paris. I said, okay. So we go our own ways. Stipe Miocic beats the shit out of him. Beats the shit out of him. So that ended that whole conversation. And I should have cut him that day.
And while it's pretty well documented that Francis is not an easy guy to work with, it's hard to believe the UFC would keep him around after physically assaulting the company's president. But the assault allegation aside, there's a pattern here, and the current heavyweight champion could be next.
So you're not too happy then on what the president of the organization is saying towards it?
Well, what do you think? Tom didn't want to continue in the fight, so.
Weirdly enough, when thinking about how the UFC treated Tom Aspinall, like keeping him on the sidelines for John Jones and then implying that he may have quit in his fight against Cyril Gane, it sure seems like the promotion is cooking another heavyweight disaster.
Hey, when I come back, there is no more Mr. Nice Guy. Nice Tom. When it comes to MMA, he's gone. And I'm going full bad guy.
Aspinall ended up having a serious eye injury after the eye pokes. Doctors later confirmed he developed bilateral traumatic Brown syndrome, a condition that may need surgery and will keep him sidelined for longer. And the heavyweight champion has already begun voicing his issues with Dana White.
Slightly disappointing because he hadn't spoke to me. He hadn't given any he was already giving updates on my health and he had no idea what had gone on. Yeah, so disappointing, mate. Disappointing.
The notion of it being framed as Tom didn't want to continue, as opposed to he got poked in the eye, he couldn't see, he can't get that stuff. That phrase, the way that picture was painted, in the moment you're in the hospital, you're hearing this, you're seeing this, and how did that sit with you?
I was very disappointed. Yeah, very disappointed.
Funnily enough, Aspinall only has 2 fights left in his contract. His dad and manager have already shown interest in leaving MMA for boxing, and Tom already has a professional boxing license dating back to 2017. Aspinall could very well be the next to follow Ngannou's blueprint. He might not land mega fights with Tyson Fury or Anthony Joshua, but he doesn't need to. With his name value, he could very well make more money elsewhere, maybe even help Francis financially ruin the PFL while he's at it. And if he walks, he could be the next guy to test the limits of the UFC's monopoly. And another fighter who has a lot to say about the UFC and MMA is Ronda Rousey, albeit for all the wrong reasons. We have a full breakdown of Ronda's fall from grace in combat sports. To watch that, check out this video next. Thank you for watching.